All right. So I'm the Council District 4 representative on CFAC. For those of you too who are not familiar with CFAC, it is much like a neighborhood council. It is a volunteer committee. And the way that you get on the committee is that you're nominated in your council district, and your council member selects you, and then it goes to the mayor, and then the mayor appoints you. And so each council district has, in an ideal situation, would have one representative and one alternate. And the former CD4 rep was named Julie Stromberg, and she left back in the spring. And then I was nominated and selected by Councilmember Rue, and then I was put on CFAC. And so a little bit of background about myself, why I was, I guess, nominated, and the kind of work that I do, just to give you a background of where my head is at in the environmental world. I'm a native plant horticulturist. What I do is I grow California native plants. I do habitat restoration. I educate people about native habitats and wildlife value in landscapes. I'm involved with an effort to revitalize a former municipal nursery in Griffith Park, which is the rightmost upper photo and lowermost photo on the right. And this nursery used to produce anywhere from 500,000 to 2 million plants for the city park system. And so after the 70s, there were budget cuts, and it was completely kind of abandoned. And now there's an effort to revitalize it, and specifically to grow native plants on that property for park projects. And then also another partner on that site is City Plants, and they're beginning to grow their own trees for the first time. So they used to always buy their trees in, and now the Conservation Corps is beginning a tree growing program there. So it's kind of a really exciting site, and the place where I'm involved. I've also worked at the Theodore Payne Foundation for wildflowers and native plants for many years. And I do a lot of work in Griffith Park in collaboration with the Friends of Griffith Park group. And conservation is a big part of my mindset and my ethic, and it's kind of where my heart is at. And so CFAC tends to be a little bit more tree oriented. However, we're having a lot of really good, robust kind of conversations about what the forest kind of means. So the main mission of CFAC is to achieve a healthy, safe, and enduring Los Angeles community forest ecosystem, meaning the whole shebang, for the enjoyment and well-being of all. And so by forest or forest ecosystem, we're talking about street trees, of course. So anytime a street tree is being requested for removal, whether it's because of a driveway or a sidewalk repair or something like that, it comes to the neighborhood councils, it comes to CFAC. If it seems really unavoidable, then it's unavoidable. But if it seems like something else could be done, we like to see some more creative, either sidewalk bump outs or something like that could help retain the tree as much as possible. Park trees, so trees on other city park properties is another aspect of what our urban forest is. Private property trees, probably the biggest. Our urban forest is mainly private property trees. So if we lose private property trees, if the education about trees ever gets to the point where people devalue them on private property, we would see our the urban forest shrink significantly, and the effect of losing all those trees to have a pretty significant public health impact. And so that, even though there's less that people can do to tell other people how to deal with their trees, private property trees are still a big part of our urban forest. Protected trees are one that is very, very prominent and kind of near and dear to many of the people on CFAC. Protected trees are native species that are being diminished more and more in our landscapes, especially in the hillside development communities, in Hollywood Hills and Laurel Canyon and places like that. And the native plant communities and wildlands and protected trees often go hand in hand. And so you often see developments that are interfering with wildlife habitat zones, wildlife corridors, and things like that. So that's kind of all contained in this idea of what this urban forest is. So to give you kind of just a brief example, there are some shortcomings with the protected tree ordinance. The shortcomings being that these projects often go through the design phase. They get approved by planning, they get approved by all departments, and then they end up at the Board of Public Works asking for protected tree removal after it's been gone through years of design approvals and processes. And so by the time it gets to us, there's big pressure for the Board of Public Works to approve this project because so much money has already gone into it. And we see it as CFAC, and you guys see it as neighborhood council reps, that you see it way too late in the design process. So for example, this project is in Laurel Canyon, and it involves the removal of 10 protected trees, coast live oak and California black walnut. And the California black walnut is a rare species. It occurs only in Southern California, nowhere else on the planet. And so this is a very, very significant loss. And this area in specific is actually a state map designated habitat linkage zone. So it has wildlife corridor values, and yet it's still exempt from CEQA because it just is. And it's still, it's still getting permits for the protected tree removal. So CFAC made an objection. We went to the hearing. It's been postponed. It's going to, we're requesting that they do a wildlife easement area, that they gift a portion of the property to MRCA, that they consider a 2-to-1 area mitigation, where they purchase or at least donate to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy an equal amount of land so that they can at least protect adjacent land, since they're going to be negatively impacting this space. But we don't know whether any of those things are going to actually go through. We can only offer our suggestions. The ideal situation is that ahead of time, this wouldn't have gotten to this point. And so there's a lot of work being done within the city with regards to a protected tree ordinance overhaul, led by Rachel Malloridge, who's the city forest officer. There's work in the planning department with the wildlife pilot study. The wildlife pilot study is set to make regulations for how people can develop in these hillsides and the kinds of things, even with regards to fencing, lighting, etc., how we can make it so that these developments are kind of working with our native wildlife and ecosystem. And of course, there's also the LA Sanitation Biodiversity Initiative, which is also hopefully going to be something that's implementable, that supports biodiversity and native habitat. So all these things are kind of melding together and happening together while all these developments still are kind of destroying a lot of kind of native plant communities. And so we're hoping that, even though everything takes so long in the city, we're hoping that some of our urging, some of our letters of either support or opposition can help kind of motivate a good direction in terms of conservation of urban forests and urban plant communities. What's really significant about California is that we are a biodiversity hotspot. That is an international designation that was given to the California Floristic Province by Conservation International across the entire world. There's only about, I think, 36 places that are designated as conservation biodiversity hotspots. And what a biodiversity hotspot means is that there's at least 1,500 vascular plants that are endemic, meaning they occur nowhere else on the planet. So were we to lose them, we would lose them off the face of the earth. California has a ton of those plants. And the California black walnut, which is featured in this removal, is one of those species. And then the other thing that would designate a place a biodiversity hotspot is that it has to have 30% or less of its original natural vegetation. And I think in California, we have lost more than 75% of our natural vegetation. We've lost it to developments, we've lost it to agriculture. They've been replaced with other types of vegetation, but the original native indigenous plant communities have largely been destroyed. So the conservation imperative is definitely kind of strong for us to have a mindset of conservation and also just kind of respect and excitement about the uniqueness of California's flora and our trees. So big picture goals, I think, of CFAC that I've seen that we're kind of trying to promote and trying to push forward is a strengthened tree protection, a protected tree ordinance. So that's something that, like I mentioned already, is already in the works within the city, but we want to make sure that we're promoting it from the outside, both by our vocal objections to protected tree removals, but also by supporting city staff levels, or by encouraging the city to hire enough staff to be able to enforce these kinds of things. A lot of times ordinances come in play, laws come in play without the follow through of who's going to enforce this. And so we want to make sure that there's adequate city staffing to enforce the protected tree ordinance, to combat illegal prunings and removals, to ensure the wildlife pilot study regulations, as well as the biodiversity initiatives, are fully implemented and implementable. We'd like to see a restriction on developments that might harm and threaten the last remaining indigenous plant populations. Restrictions don't necessarily mean no development, but sensitive development. We want to see a general change in attitude in the city of trees as essential city infrastructure. And so trees always seem like either a luxury or an easily replaceable thing. And we want the city to treat it like they do electricity, like they do plumbing, like they do street lights and other essential infrastructure. And of course, we also want a tree canopy equity, where we want to see that there are more trees planted in areas that are more at risk of the heat island effect. In poor neighborhoods tend to have a poor level of tree canopy cover, higher ambient air temperature. And so tree equity is also a goal of CFAC, and I think a goal of the city. I've heard it also spoken by city plants. They're doing a lot of research to see where there's lack as far as tree canopy equity, and how to focus more of their attentions in those kinds of communities. So that's all I have. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know.
This was great.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much, Katherine.
You're welcome.
I have a question related to the protected tree ordinance. You mentioned wanting to voice support. CFAC is voicing support for pushing to make that a stronger ordinance and make sure that it's a priority for the city. Are you aware of whether or not this will be coming through the city council as a council file? Because we as the neighborhood council, especially as the environmental committee on our neighborhood council, would love to be able to submit a community impact statement supporting and standing with CFAC's position on it.
That's a very good question. I don't know exactly how that is going to work. I do know the city forest officer is working on a major overhaul. I imagine it has to go through the same kind of approval process that an original protected tree ordinance went through, just because it's going to have different rules. I don't know if an editing of an existing ordinance has the exact same process as the original one, but once I find out, I can definitely alert you guys for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll try to stay in touch and do our own research on that as well and see what we can find, because we would love to provide whatever additional support we can.
Thank you.
Just your talk about, and then Sean, just FYI, I do see your hand, and we'll get to you in a moment. When you were talking about protected, or not protected, sorry, when you're talking about private property trees, I'm wondering, do you guys do any, like, is there any work or consideration of how to handle rentals? I've seen more than once, including on at my own rental actually, because the trees do not affect the life of the owner. We had a tree that was in rough shape in our backyard, had not been taken care of by, previous tenants, was dying essentially, was removed and not replaced. And we do not own the property, so we really don't have a say. And it's, I know a lot of renters are in apartment buildings, but especially in this neighborhood, we're mostly single family homes. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of normally I feel like these kinds of discussions center around homeowners, and I'm wondering if any of those kinds of discussions are talking about how to handle renters.
Yeah, I don't, that hasn't really come up. Usually when it comes to private properties, trees, they say it's like an at right or by right.
Yeah.
They're allowed to do whatever they want kind of a thing. Sometimes when it's adjacent to a sidewalk or there's a real like public impact of losing it, there could be some, a little bit more public
Input.
Feedback and input that would be a little bit more, I would say, valid. When it comes to protected tree species, if that was the case, say there was a big coast live oak and that was removed, then that could concern everybody. So that's something for sure. But if it was just a regular tree that died, I would say that was something to take up with the property owner. There's nothing really that the city can do in that scenario. I would say that's a big education piece, and that's something we're also trying to push is for LADWP to put some more educational information about pruning trees under wires, or how to do this, or that you should water your street trees. We're in a drought, or things like that. So there's an educational push that we're trying to get some of the departments to pay attention to and consider adding into their mailers and the water bill and things like that. But as far as, what there is, as far as actual recourse, legal recourse, I think that would just be a matter of you talking to whoever owns the property and kind of insisting.
Well, and I know private property is also a question that Jim often has about various private property policies and what can be removed, and even stuff that I'm trying to remember what the ordinance is that he's always concerned about. It's a drought ordinance where you can replace your front lawn and rip out trees, and you literally get an incentive to do it,
right?
Because they're trying to get it to be replaced with drought tolerant plants, and that's a big irritation of his. So yeah, I was trying to remember what his
that's not, as far as I know. So those are like the DWP or the MWB, like the lawn rebate program. And so the lawn rebate meaning,
yes, I think that's it's lawn, but I know that trees get removed in the process, and that really irks him.
I've never even thought of that. I've been involved pretty heavily with that kind of thing because I've done landscape design for people who want to transform their yard into like a drought tolerant native landscape. It's never occurred to me that anyone would ever think to remove a tree to do that. And so that, yeah, if that's incentivizing people to remove trees, then that's a shame. Nobody that I've ever either worked with who's been doing that, even my sister did a program like that. Like, we retain the trees, like that's not, there's no question that you're not, even if it's not a drought tolerant tree, you just water that tree and then you plant everything around it. So I don't know that that's necessarily being promoted. I don't know that DWP or whoever's doing the rebate program says, if you have a thirsty tree, remove it. I don't think that's part of the language. I think people are just either ignorant and making that error, or they're willfully doing it because they want some excuse to remove the trees. So that's a shame if that's happening.
And I may be misrepresenting, but it's something he's talked about a lot, and I just wanted to see if you had a take on it that I could bring back to him.
Yeah, I would say that as far as I know, that's not the intent of the rebate program. That if people are doing that, it's very likely that they're misinformed about that. I don't think I've ever heard from DWP or any of those people that tree removals should be a part of that. It's really just the lawn.
Right.
Yeah.
Katherine, do you have anything else before I let Sean?
No, go ahead, toss it to Sean.
All right. Sean, you are able to unmute yourself.
All right. Hello, and thank you for having me. And thank you for coming out today. I do have a question. I'm in Toluca Lake at Lancashire Riverside. And there is a Chase Bank with very large property that's there, and they're getting ready to develop it. Not anytime soon, but they're going to develop it. But there's like 12 huge pine trees that are probably, I don't know, 40, 50 feet tall. And I'm 99% sure, having looked at the plans when they were doing the zoning permits, that they're just going to tear those trees down. I don't know if that's something that can be brought up or is any way to save the trees. I know that may sound a little naive because they're huge trees, but I'm just kind of concerned because they're just going to tear those trees down.
Yeah, the pine trees, they're not part of the protected tree ordinance, but I think one of the aspects of the overhaul might be to include significantly sized trees, maybe as being protected trees. Again, that's not something that's relevant in time to what you're dealing with right now, because I'm sure it's going to happen before the protected tree ordinance is overhauled and revamped. But what I would say is take pictures of that site prior to any of that stuff happening. And again, like, one of the biggest flaws is before it comes to the neighborhood councils, or by the time it comes to the neighborhood councils and by the time it comes to CFAC, it's often, way late. And the tree removal permits, they can remove like 1 or 2, but I think if it's like 3 or more, then they have to, then it has to go through kind of like a public potential opposition window of time. It's like 3 days or something very, very low. So that should come to the neighborhood councils before it's done, if they're doing the right thing, if they're doing it by permit. If they're not, it's not coming through the neighborhood councils, it's not coming through CFAC for us to make a comment about it, then it was illegally done. In which case, if you have photo evidence and you can report that, you can file, I think you can file like a legal tree removal or illegal pruning type of thing, report on my 311 LA or whatever that website is, and have a kind of a written copy of it. That way you can have kind of a paper trail to what it is, and then you're welcome to also follow up with us and see if there's a way that we can reach out to field representatives in CD4 and bring it to their attention.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.